The midday sun bore down like a hammer over Burkina Faso. The land shimmered in heat waves, the red earth cracked and thirsty, the air thick with dust. It was the kind of heat that strips men down to their core, that tests resolve, that burns away all illusion. And under that relentless sky, two armies faced one another. On one side, rows of Burkina soldiers, young and old, uniforms streaked with sweat, boots planted firmly in their own soil. Behind them a sea of civilians, faces etched with defiance, mothers clutching children, elders leaning on staffs, youth waving flags that carried the colors of Africa with pride. On the other side stood the Americans, armored, armed to the teeth, helmets shining under the sun, rifles ready, vehicles lined like beasts of war waiting to unleash destruction. They had come expecting compliance, expecting fear. But what they met was something else entirely, and at the center of it all stood President Ibrahim Traoré. No fortress of marble, no barricade of steel, just a man in the dust, chest out, chin lifted, eyes steady. A leader who chose to stand with his people rather than hide behind them. The silence was suffocating. Every breath, every shuffle of boots, every click of metal carried like thunder. Somewhere, a crow cawed, and the sound sent shivers across the line. Then Traoré spoke. His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried as if the ground itself amplified it. You came here with your machines, your guns, your threats, but we stand here with something you cannot touch. Truth. And truth does not bow. The words cracked through the silence like lightning. Burkina soldiers stood taller. The crowd behind him erupted in chants. Africa! 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 The Americans shifted uneasily. They were trained for war, for ambush, for insurgents hiding in shadows. But this was different. This was not an enemy trying to hide. This was a people standing bare-chested before the strongest military on earth, daring them to strike. The commander of the U.S. forces lifted a hand, signaling his troops to hold steady. His jaw clenched tight. This was supposed to be routine, a show of dominance, a reminder of who ruled the game. But it wasn't going according to plan. Then the wind shifted, at first just a breeze. It lifted the dust, swirled it in the air. But it grew, stronger and stronger, carrying with it a presence that everyone felt but no one could explain. The Burkina soldiers didn't flinch. They knew this wind. They had felt it before, in prayer, in song, in the stillness of night when ancestors walked close. The Americans, however, felt unease crawl across their skin. A young soldier blinked, swearing he heard drums in the distance. Not mechanical drums, not explosions, but the deep rolling rhythm of djembes, ancient and unyielding. Another caught a scent in the air, faint but undeniable, like incense burning in sacred ceremony. It wasn't just wind. It was something older, something beyond training manuals, beyond guns, beyond the logic of war. Traoré raised a hand, palm open to the sky. His eyes burned, his stance unshaken. "They are here," he said softly. Not to his people, not to the Americans, but to the spirits. And in that moment, the Burkina soldiers transformed. Their eyes glowed with conviction, their hearts pounded with courage that felt borrowed from generations past. They were no longer just men with rifles. They were the living echo of every African who had ever refused chains, every warrior who had stood against colonizers, every mother who had buried a child but still whispered hope. The tension snapped when one American soldier broke formation. He was young, barely more than 20. Sweat dripped down his pale face. His hands shook as his rifle grew heavier by the second. His commander barked, "Hold the line!" But he couldn't. He stepped forward. One step, then another. His rifle slipped from his grip, hitting the dust with a dull thud. Gasps erupted across both sides. The boy's voice cracked as he shouted, "I can't do this. Not against them." The Burkina didn't raise their guns. One soldier stepped forward, placed a hand gently on the young man's shoulder, and nodded. Acceptance. Humanity. That single act detonated across the standoff. Americans looked at one another, unease in their eyes. Some bit their lips, ashamed. Others clenched their jaws, torn between orders and conscience. Because deep inside, every single one of them knew this wasn't Vietnam, it wasn't Iraq, it wasn't Afghanistan. This wasn't an enemy hiding in caves. This was a people on their own soil, staring back with nothing but dignity. Traoré's voice cut through the chaos. "You came believing we are weak. But look into our eyes. Do you see weakness or do you see fire? A fire you cannot put out?" The word spread beyond the battlefield. Cameras captured it. Phones streamed it live. Across Africa, from Lagos to Nairobi, from Dakar to Johannesburg, millions watched in awe. Elders wept. Youth shouted with fists raised. The message was clear: if Burkina Faso can stand, so can we. In Washington, panic. The Pentagon had wanted a message of dominance, but what they got was humiliation broadcast across the globe. News anchors debated fiercely, was this defiance or destiny? Was America losing its grip, or was truth finally breaking through the cracks? And in the living rooms of America itself, something strange happened. Young people watched the clip of the soldier laying down his gun. They replayed it, shared it, stitched it with their own commentary. They called him brave. They called him human. Hashtags exploded. Truth does not bow. But stand tall, the American commander, face red with fury, barked the only order left: retreat. Quiet, controlled, no spectacle. But the cameras caught it all anyway. The trucks pulled back. The soldiers turned. The so-called strongest army on earth backed away, step by step, from men who carried little more than conviction. The field erupted, not in gunfire but in celebration. Songs rose, drums pounded, feet danced in the dust. Mothers ululated, children waved flags, elders raised their hands to the sky. They were not celebrating hatred. They were celebrating dignity. That night, villages lit bonfires. Storytellers gathered the children, recounting what had happened as if it were already legend. They spoke of spirits walking among the living, of ancestors smiling, of chains shattering in silence. Today, they said, we stood not alone. Today the past stood with us, but the story rippled further. In South America, leaders whispered, if Africa rises, the balance of power shifts. In Asia, governments took notes. In Europe, unease gnawed at the old powers. For the first time in generations, the unthinkable was being asked aloud. What if Africa is no longer a shadow, but a sun? And in America itself, the young soldier who laid down his weapon became a symbol. Some branded him traitor. Others hailed him as the conscience of a crumbling empire. He disappeared from public view, but his act could not be erased. The image of his rifle falling into the dust replayed endlessly, reminding the world that even within the mightiest empire, conscience still breathes. As for Traoré, he did not gloat. He did not wave victory banners. He stood before his people, calm, steady, and said simply, "We will not kneel. Not today. Not ever again." Those words became scripture. They were painted on walls, printed on shirts, sung in classrooms. They became a mantra not just for Burkina Faso, but for every African nation yearning to breathe free. Because what the world had witnessed was not just politics. It was spiritual. It was the union of flesh and spirit, past and present, living and dead. It was the undeniable truth that Africa is not a wound on someone else's map. It is a heartbeat, ancient and unbreakable. And for every child who saw that day, a seed was planted. A seed whispering, "You are not small. You are not forgotten. You carry the blood of warriors. Stand tall, empires fall. But the spirit of a people who know their worth, never." And on that dusty field in Burkina Faso, the world learned a truth it could never unsee. So let me ask you,